We think we have a really great speaker for you this month. Today, we'll get a welcome from our Washington State Director, Maureen Morgan. Then we have a little introductory presentation from one of our state section directors, Kathleen Wyer, about the upcoming season for Ancient Aliens. Then we'll move into our keynote speaker, Selma, and she'll talk to you a little bit about herself and what she went through. And then State Section Director Walt Bierman, Section Director for Seattle, will MC the question and answer period. And then we'll, after Selma's presentation, give you a little bit of information. So at this point, Maureen, I will turn it over to you for any welcoming comments you might have.
Thank you, Dan. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody who's joining us today for Washington MUFON's monthly webinar. So over the past several months, we've hosted a number of really top-notch UFO researchers, such as David Marler, who talked to us about triangular UFOs, and he's undoubtedly the leading expert in triangular UFOs. So Washington MUFON is dedicated to educating the public about the UFO phenomena. So above and beyond just investigating UFO sightings and close encounters, we are working to help educate the public about this whole phenomenon. So due to the COVID restrictions and because we can't have on-site meetings, we have been developing what I would consider to be a top-notch Facebook and website. We're also sending out monthly newsletters and holding these webinars. So I think we're doing a pretty good job carrying through with our goal of doing more than just investigating UFOs, to further the research as well. So anyway, and I'd like to extend a thank you to all the MUFON members, many of who have been a member for decades, because without your support validates what we do. So on that note, then I will turn it back over to Dan.
Okay, Kathleen, are you ready to go with your presentation?
I think so. Let me give it a screen share here for a second. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Ancient Alien season 16 premiere, which started on November 13th, and maybe you saw it. It continues. The first episode was about the number 12, which is a mystical number for the universe. For many outside the scientific community, the significance of number 12 through mathematics and physics is at best a pretty vaguely understood piece of trivia. Researchers suggest this number comes up in all aspects of life, in patterns and through history over and over. So let me give you some examples. The number 12 and its derivatives are seen through history and the world, like the Bible has 12s all through it. Just look at Revelations. And then there's the 12 apostles of Jesus, the 12 tribes of Israel, the majestic 12, and then the Islamic sector has the largest Shia group called the Twelvers. And then there's the 12 Knights of the Round Table. And then just for fun, let's throw in the Seahawks as the 12th man. So what about Ancient Aliens, the archaeology portion of it? Ancient pyramids and monoliths were built using a cuneiform calculator. It's the Sumerian and Babylonian mathematics were based on a sexagesimal or base 60 numeric system. So that would be 5 times 12 equals 60. So why not use 10? It's easier with your 10 fingers, 10 toes. Well, maybe to start with, but as you work on that, the higher the numbers go, you have to start figuring out fractions and you need to put in a decimal point. And then your project could get a little wonky if you don't calculate it quite correctly. So legend has it that the Babylonians and the Sumerians were taught to count by the sky people or the Anunnaki. They used their thumb and the pads of their hands to count. So this would be the pointer, and it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Either way, however you do it, turns out to be 12, which I thought was pretty interesting. The show has its regulars like Hugh Newman, one of my favorites, because he writes about giants in America and researches monoliths in stone and rock art, like the 12 pillars surrounding the 11,500 monolith in Göbekli Tepe of Southeast Turkey, and Ilkley Moor site in Yorkshire, which has 12 stones in a circle and boasts of strange lights at night. So let me tell you a little bit more about the 6-digit phenomena, or polydactylism. According to ancient myths, giants who walk on the earth had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Maybe there's several reasons for having 6 digits. Maybe it's a birth defect, which is called hexadactyly. But here are some other interesting historical facts of which spiritual meanings of 6 fingers plays a role. There is a tribe called the Warani in Ecuador, and most of the people in this tribe have 6 fingers and 6 toes. Medically, this tribe depicts no major health issues in its generations. So that means no sign of cancer, no high blood pressure, no allergies, no tooth decay. Maybe it's their diet, and maybe something else is at play. One of the studies was done by a Dr. Laddick, who worked with a tribe to try and bank some of the genetic cells in order to help those people who had those problems. So for more information, you can check out the New York Times November 1st, 1983 issue. What about repeating patterns in stone? There are rock petroglyphs throughout the Americas. So here I am, I'm in front of petroglyphs from Winnemucca, and this is near Pyramid Lake in Nevada. This site is massive, and it's over 14,000 years old, one of the oldest sites in North America. Why were the ancestral natives honoring people with extra digits? New research shows having extra toes or fingers was a revered trait. Petroglyphs show us this reverence in the Chaco Canyon rock art and newspaper rock in Utah and the Valley of Fire in Nevada all show the 6-digit phenomena. While polydactylism certainly does not indicate these are giants or Sasquatch, though that would be fun to think so, these are genetic relations with lost tribes who have an extra digit on both their hands and feet. In ancient culture, it was a belief that a child born with 6 fingers was raised to be a king. Although nowadays, it's believed that a person with 6 digits is bound to be a successful person. Well, maybe. Take a look at Kate Hudson and Halle Berry or Oprah Winfrey's toes and judge for yourself. So there are other interesting things in season 16 of Ancient Aliens. Maybe you're more interested in some of the scientific aspects. So Dr. Keku, who is a PhD in string theory, notes, the numbers game is the hottest topic in all of physics. And he says, you can't cram all the forces into 3 dimensions, but maybe 12. Or if you're interested in the music of the spheres, which is based on string theory, or the sub-based atomic particles like neutrons, protons, quarks, or even smaller particles vibrating in harmony, or fast radio bursts known as FRBs, like the one in 2012, FRB 121102, named after the year, the month, and the day. One of the 3 repeating sources that has improved the understanding of this phenomena. Maybe you're interested in the 12 vortexes and the 2012 CERN God particle, or biology, 12 cranial nerves and brain plasticity aspects. And maybe you're just interested in seeing what Giorgio's hair looks like for the season 16 of Ancient Aliens. It's all there for you. Ancient Aliens 16 on Friday nights, the History Channel, or as David Childress would say, makes you wonder. So now I know everybody wants to hear Selma talk and talk about her story, so I'll return it to you.
Ancient Aliens, are we not all addicted to Ancient Aliens?
Yeah.
It's like a guilty pleasure. Briefly met Selma Siddick at, after her presentation on the Ariel School incident at the MUFON, International MUFON Symposium in New Jersey last year. And for me, it was one of the highlights of the whole symposium because it was a phenomenon I was not very much aware of. UFOs encounters near schoolyards and schools. And I was intrigued with the possibility that, well, gee, what was this? Is this a phenomenon that's being underreported? Is it being hidden? You know, is this something that's been happening throughout history all over the world and no one's been reporting and talking about it? So she really got me intrigued about the whole phenomena. Anyway, so I did a little bit of research and found that the UFO researcher Preston Dennett has a book, a new book out entitled Schoolyard UFO Encounters, the top or 100 True Accounts. And they're all remarkable. And this was just 100 that he could fit between, two covers. He had many, many, many more school accounts that he could have written about. Anyway, these happened in broad daylight, generally seen by many people, including students and adults. So his top 4 cases was the West Hall High School case in Victoria, Australia, in 1966, in which 200 or more witnesses, including teachers and students, saw a large saucer or cigar-shaped object land near to the school. One of the interesting things about this particular case is that very quickly the authorities came in. But first of all, they had jets in pursuit of this object soon after. They had authorities who came in who warned everybody to shut up, not to talk about the case or this sighting, and even to the point of threatening the children. So this was a case that was largely forgotten to history until recently rediscovered and written about. But it was an example of just how strong the efforts can be to stamp out unwanted reports. Another one is the Broadhaven Primary School also in New South Wales from 1977, where 14 witnesses observed a large cigar-shaped object hovering near the school. At the Crestfield Elementary School in Florida, in which 200 school-aged children and 3 adults witnessed an oval or cigar-shaped UFO near their schoolyard, and other people from a distance saw it hovering over there, and in Zimbabwe. And with that, we should turn it over to the expert and let Selma tell us all about it.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm so honored to be a part of this panel, and thanks for making and taking time on this Saturday afternoon. I appreciate it in this very crazy time that we are in. I have become a lot more comfortable in sharing my experience, I think, as I've gotten older, simply because I've been able to make more sense of it. But that was not necessarily the case in the beginning after the incident happened, in terms of being bombarded with press, which is what happened for some time. It was just very confusing to anyone, let alone an 11-year-old. So I'm just gonna read a little bit of a speech that I wrote a few years ago. I'm gonna pull some pieces out to paint a picture for you all of a little bit about what happened that day. And then I'm always interested in people's feedback and their questions. And I appreciate you allowing me the space to have this kind of a dialogue and conversation, because I feel that folk get out as much of it as I get back from them. So thank you all. Okay, so I'm just gonna dive in, and I apologize because I'm using my phone to, that is what I'm reading. Okay, so the day of the incident, I was standing next to my then friend, my then bestie, and for anonymity, I'll keep her name out of this. We were playing our usual games, and she pointed out something in the bushes about 2 football fields away that was shining very brightly. It was so bright. But I suggested that perhaps it was a reflection from the sun on the granite rock nearby. We both knew that that was not the case. Those rocks have never shone like that before. We were in the playground having our break time, what you call recess here, and that is why we were playing outside. Painting the picture for you of what my school was like, it used to be a farm. So it was about 35 minutes out of the capital city, Harare, and there was a lot of wilderness, with the exception of obviously where the playground was and the school was built. So there was a lot of nature in its norm that had been untouched. And that was what my friend and I were looking toward in this particular moment. At this point, people started gathering around and were pointing at the blinding, flashing, shining thing, trying to make sense of it and trying to figure out what it was. Panic started to ensue. Some children were crying. Some were in shock. What we all felt was confusion. All I was thinking of was checking on my sister, who was in grade 4 at the time, and my brother, who was in grade 3. I felt if I was scared, I felt for sure that if I were scared, that my brother and sister were as well, even though I was 11. I always took care of them. In an attempt to comfort my friend and perhaps myself, I reached out and grabbed my friend's hand, and we both saw what I call the being. I couldn't tell you if there were multiple beings. If they were, they looked the same. It was about 4 foot tall with human-esque qualities in that its form was similar to that of ours, with 2 arms, 2 legs, and a head, albeit an unusual sized head and shaped head. Our playground was bordered by a boundary of eucalyptus tree trunks, or what we call gum trees. Beyond that was tall bush. We knew never to veer past those logs unless for a sporting event. And on that day, when I saw that being, neither of us crossed that boundary, even though it was 1 to 2 feet away from me. I could have reached out and touched it, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, stuck, literally in the spot where I stood, and mentally, I could not break the eye lock I was engaged in. There was an eerie quietness around me, and in my mind, we locked eyes. I no longer heard the chaos of the playground. I felt timelessness, stillness, captivated by this presence, unsure of what I was looking at, but knowing that it was not the norm. I now know that even if I don't ever make complete sense of it, it was special. So after that, one of the children ran up to, you're probably wondering where all the adults were. Where's the adult supervision? Well, it was a massive playground, and the younger children had a separate section of the playground. It was all one big playground, but they had a separate section. And they had a teacher monitoring them. This is essentially where my brother and sister were. And where we were in the big kids section, there was no supervision because we were the older kids. The teachers on that particular day were having a staff meeting, so the break ran longer than usual, and that's also why there was less adult supervision on the playground. When somebody did send for the teachers, they did not come out immediately. I don't know how long it took. I don't even know how long this entire incident took, where I was completely captivated. But it seemed to take a while for them to come down, and when they did, the entire playground was in mass hysteria. So I can only imagine as adults trying to understand what was going on with these kids, but with us kids not even being able to completely articulate or let alone understand what we had just experienced. It took me a very long time to talk about this incident after the initial what happened, which occurred for the next 6 to 8 months with press. And I didn't talk about it again until about 2010, when I met Randall Nickerson, who was doing I believe he was continuing Dr. John Mack's work. Dr. John Mack did come to our school. I do remember meeting him. I don't actually remember what we spoke about, to be honest. I don't remember many of those interviews. I think it's something I blocked out because they just happened over and over and over and over again. I do remember this. I remember a few things. One, he was very tall, very, very tall. Of course, I was 11, so, but he was tall, and I loved his American accent. And he was kind. He spoke to us in a way, and this obviously now I understand as an adult, having done a little bit of research about him, because he was a psychologist, he knew how to talk to people. He wasn't just a reporter just asking questions. And I don't fault any reporters for that, but he really knew how to talk to us. It was like he cared. One of the things I appreciated, I know the first thing that I recognized was he actually sat down on our little chairs. I don't know how he was able to fit in it. He was a large man, but he did. He sat down on our little desks, and I remember thinking, yeah, okay, this guy seems okay. And it ensued in a whole other version of conversation about our experience collectively as well as individually. I know I gave you a very small snippet. I'm sure there are questions that folk have. I want to kind of end there and dive into more of a conversation and let you all decide which way you want that to go. Dan, I
Well,
think.
why don't you pick up from there and start your question section?
We had traded emails on some questions I had for you. I hope you had the opportunity to look those over. And I did watch your virtual video at the UFO Congress in Phoenix that was a couple of months ago. And I had
Oh yeah, I was like, wait.
So I think we'll probably, handle this a little bit like that.
Okay.
But one question that I came to mind, there was another UFO Congress back in 2013. And there was a gentleman by the name of Lynn Buchanan. He was a military intelligence officer. And through his psychic powers, he was able to do a remote control view on 4 different sites throughout the world that were alien sites. One was in Zimbabwe. It was under Nyanga Mountain, and they did change the name of the mountain. Are you familiar with the one I'm talking about?
Yeah,
It's
yes.
about 10,000 feet high, and it's got a lot of history of unusual happenings and people missing and aircraft missing and things like that, similar to some of these other locations. What do you think about that? Have you ever heard anything about an alien base there?
No, when you pose that question, that one, honestly, out of all of them, grabbed my attention the most because I'm familiar with Mount Nyangani. I think it goes by Mount Nyangani now, but it is in the Eastern Highlands of the country, in a town called Nyanga. And the Eastern Highlands, if you picture what the environment is like here in the Pacific Northwest, it's like that. Except it doesn't snow, obviously, but it's so green. That's where our coffee and our tea are grown. It's a very magical place. It's always been known as at least from as far as I know, it's like very mystical. I have never been to Mount Nyangani, but I do remember that there was very interesting, unexplained experiences that have happened there. I don't know. I think I just kind of chalked it up to I don't know, maybe just like folklore, but when you put that in there, I really was fascinated by that. I think that it's not we don't have very high mountains in Zimbabwe. That's like, I think it was 2,000 meters or something, 2,500 meters. It's obviously walkable, but it's not particularly high. So I was like, okay, well, height has nothing to do with it. I'm wondering if there's something to do, there is again, a lot of granite rock around there. And I don't know, by any means, I'm not an expert. So I just wonder if there's a pull with the type of rock and the activity that has happened, phenomenon activity like this, that is connected. I have no idea, because even at Ariel, the place we were looking at was a mound, kind of what we call a kopje. So not a mountain, but it's filled with a lot of rocks, but there were a lot of granite rocks. And that's what we thought we were looking at initially. It was a reflection of the sun on the rocks, but it was way too bright for that, far too bright. So I know Nyangani has granite rock, I believe, and I think that's interesting. I'm fascinated by that. I would love to know more of what comes out of that.
Okay. You mentioned Dr. John Mack, a psychoanalyst from Harvard University, and his visit there. A question came in asking if you have read John Mack's 2 books. If so, how do they compare to David Jacobs' work?
I have not read any of John Mack's work. I, again, didn't even think about him until Randall Nickerson I didn't think about him again until Randall Nickerson popped back into our lives. And when I say ours, I mean, he reached out to a lot of my former classmates and was able to really get us talking about it again, and also connected us back with each other. So I have not read any of John Mack's work. I was always curious what happened after he visited us. Like, what did he do with the information that he gathered? I have no idea. Are there papers? People always ask me like, well, did you watch this? I honestly, after the event, incident, I didn't want to talk about it, just nothing. And I think now I'm slowly opening up to being able to learn a little bit more about it, not because I have a problem with it. I literally, it's re-traumatizing for me. I have to, it takes me back, and I'm just in a different headspace, I think, now than I was even 5 years ago, where I'm able to sit down and assess the research accordingly. And with experts like you can guide me. So I think I'm ready to read some of John Mack's work now, but I haven't yet.
Now, his Pulitzer Prize was, I believe, psychotherapy for children and regression analysis, clinical regression analysis for anyone who had an encounter. Did you ever go through regression or hypnosis?
No, but I've been asked if that's something I would consider, specifically because my friend that I was standing next to on the playground got messages, and I don't have any recollection of having received any messages. But she and I were actually connected because, again, I was holding her hand. And we don't know what that timeline was like. And I attribute to me not getting any messages the fact that I broke free of her hand to go and check on my brother and sister. But that does not mean that I didn't get any messages. So I have been asked numerous times if that's something I would consider. And I think I would. But I have not yet received either of those. I think I'm at a point now where I'm comfortable enough not only talking about it, but embodying my experience, that I do believe that I would be ready for it. Let me know if you have any pointers on who to,
No.
any suggestions.
No, I don't carry his credentials. Back to the potential alien base. I know the other 3 bases throughout the world that were viewed by Lynn Buchanan, they all have military bases close by. And when I was at the symposium in 2019, I met a past director who was stationed in Zimbabwe. And I tried to find research whether or not there was a US facility there at any one time. And this would have probably been in the 70s, maybe late 60s.
Oh, then you're right. That predates me. So I'm just like, no. I don't even know if there are any US bases in Zimbabwe. Now that I'm thinking about it, I doubt it. Probably south. No.
Yeah, it's interesting why we have these bases so close to these 3 or 4 mountains throughout the world that have these
yeah, bases. It is. I definitely, I could be wrong, unless it's like some seriously classified information, which I doubt, for goodness sake. Zimbabwe is like, why would that be classified? I cannot think of, I feel like that would be something that I would have known, we would have been taught. There's no, not in Zim. There's also no ports. It's a landlocked country. It just, strategic, again, I'm not US intelligence, it doesn't make sense to me. Okay. Yes, we have a lot of minerals and there are a lot of, there's a lot of resources, but I don't think, but you could be stationed in South and still have access to all of that, because again, in South, it's a much larger country and you have multiple ports. So I don't think so. No, I doubt it.
So we're getting a lot of questions now from the registrants.
Okay. This
question came in from Nicole. What did the beings look like?
Okay. Hi, Nicole. The beings looked very, very human-esque. And I say that only because from an 11-year-old perspective, that is the closest analogy I could give. Very, very short. I was I'm pretty tall. I think I'm actually average height, but I was a very tall 11-year-old, and this being was actually shorter than me. I would say that the skin color is always something that it's often something that I think about, because it doesn't really quite have there isn't really anything I can really connect it with other than something along the lines of like an eggshell color, but that's not right. It's something else. But it was very, very pale and small, body stature wise. Again, hands, fingers. I didn't really see its feet, but it was dressed in what I can only describe as, or best describe as, like a scuba diving outfit. It was all black. It was skin tight, no hair, and a very big head and big eyes. Sort of like a line for a mouth, maybe like 2 holes for a nose. But very diminutive. That's definitely the one. I mean, I remember being like, even though I was scared, I was like, okay, I think I can take whatever this is. Like I can take, because stature wise, I was taller than it was. My friend who was standing next to me was maybe about the same height as it was. But you know, again, we were terrified only because we didn't know what we were looking at. So I hope that answers your question, Nicole.
Did the being approach you directly, or did you walk toward the being?
I think it was a little bit of both. So when my friend and I were looking at this shiny object, which I think we can attribute it to being the craft, like the reflection coming from the craft. That was away, again, that was like 2 football fields away. The being itself was much, much, much closer. I think it was a little bit of us walking closer to it, or out of curiosity, or walking closer to the boundary to see if what we could actually make sense of the glaringness, and then the being also walking up towards us in that same timing. The interesting thing is that in between us, again, are these massive logs that are our boundary. It seems it was very primitive, but we didn't need much more than that. We followed the rules really, really well. And the interesting thing about that is that so did the being. The being was, I mean, I have very long arms. My arms are about 1 meter or so long. And that is, I would say, about the distance that the being was between us, but neither of us crossed that boundary. Okay. So if I actually had been able to move, I would have been able to touch it. My friend, not so much, because again, she was a little bit shorter than me and she had shorter arms. I would absolutely have been able to touch it. So I think, again, both of us, or my friend and I, walked towards the area, sort of just trying to make a little bit more sense of it out of curiosity. And at the same time, the being also kind of approached us, but nobody crossed the boundary. Most fascinating thing.
I guess this person had watched some of your videos, and the question is, one of the young girls said at the time to the reporter that she saw the entity, but the face was blank, like a sheet of paper. Did you know that person, the young girl, or? No. Well, I would have to see the video to know who she was talking about. I probably did, but I don't recall hearing that story. That's very interesting. Very, very interesting. And that was definitely not my experience. So you see, again, it's fascinating because, I think they said 69 children, but there were so many more of us who were on the playground, and I don't believe they actually interviewed the younger children. So they stopped interviewing, I think they didn't interview kids under anybody lower than grade 4. So the grade 3, grade 2, grade 1 did not get interviewed at all. And I actually don't know why that is. I actually found that out recently, and I was like, oh, I didn't even think about that.
And I think that a part of that is also, you know, they were so much younger, it was probably a means to protect them to a degree, and also, you know, to hopefully, I'm assuming, not re-traumatize them. And maybe also it was the assumption that, well, this incident that occurred, well, the most reports came from our section of the playground. But again, we don't know that for sure, because there are many people who were never interviewed and we don't know what they saw. It's definitely more than 69.
Have you stayed in touch with your classmates, or does the Ariel private school ever have reunions?
So I actually went back home for the first time last January, and it was so moving. I actually passed Ariel. I wasn't quite ready to go back. I do want to the next time I go home. I don't know if they have reunions. I connected maybe last year with the now headmistress, Miss Bates, who was then teacher. I can't remember what grade. She did teach me in grade 4, I believe. She's to this day she was one of my favorite teachers ever. She, you know, when you always ask like which teacher helped influence your life or something, she is definitely up there. And I didn't know how she was doing that, but she did. I do understand she is the headmistress now, and I would really like to go back and see her. I just think a part of the process of dealing with all of this was first dealing with it internally, and then being able to also speak about it on platforms like this. And so that when I do go back, I'm in a head frame and mind space and heart space to be able to take in everything, because it's going to be incredibly emotional, not only because of this incident. This was my primary school years, you know. I had some of the best times in that place. And the fact that she's still alive is, and she's running the school is, I think, really, really special. So I don't believe they have reunions. I have not been back. I would love to. I think I'm ready.
I've got another question. This comes in from Daniel, and has Ariel School experience, how has it changed you? And I would like to add a little bit to that, in that,
Okay.
do you think any of the students that witnessed the entities, did it give them any gifted abilities, or maybe I've read sometimes with an encounter like that, a childhood medical condition like asthma may be cured.
Mm.
Have you ever got any feedback from any of your classmates?
No. I've never gotten any feedback on that. And again, I don't know everybody else's medical history. I can tell you mine. A few years prior, I was hit by a 2.5-ton truck and lost a kidney. I don't attribute my great health to, or I don't know if I can attribute my very, very good health to that experience a few years later, but I am doing really well. I have one less organ. You know, I had a traumatic it could have been tragic. It was very nearly tragic. That was just but one injury, but I'm fine. I also feel that I think for me, having that experience and then, you know, having all the press and being asked what happened, you don't really have time to sit and process, right? Also, I'm 11. I don't want to process. I want to go play. So it's like, let's just go. But now as a 37-year-old, I can sit back and look and think, okay, this is definitely something I think that allowed me to question a lot of what I was told. You know, maybe I was that way before. My mother might argue that I was always that way. When somebody just tells me something or, you know, gave me information, I would always question, okay, but why? But could it be this? So, you know, there was never anything emphatic that was like, oh, UFOs don't exist. There wasn't anything emphatic that said that they did either. You know, we just went about our lives. This was a time when the internet was definitely not prevalent. I don't even know if I know anybody who had the internet in 1994 in Zimbabwe. We definitely didn't have cable. I mean, it was there. My mother just preferred us to read. And I grew up on a farm. It was the literal bush. So my knowledge of anything like this, anything out of the world and the realm that I was in, didn't even exist. This experience definitely opened up my mind to the fact that, well, there's definitely something out there. Not even that it could be, that it was out there, because I know what I saw. And I know that I was with people who saw, if not the same thing, something similar, but we definitely all felt the same way. So I think there was that is definitely something that was magical. And I think a combined experience that we all have, but not necessarily healing. But I don't know, maybe, I mean, I'm still kicking it with this one kidney. We're doing well.
You look very well.
Well, thank you.
This is from Scott. Would you describe the beings as grays, or would you describe their physical characteristics a little more in detail? Is there anything that really about the being that stuck out most, more than anything else? And I'm going to try to get one other question answered. This is coming in from Bruce. Did you notice any unusual smells or odors from the beings?
Those are great questions. So, fun fact, I didn't even know what a gray was until a few years ago. Again, I was not someone who actively researched anything UFO related. I was just like, I'll tell you what I saw, and I'm not interested in the rest. Having seen what a gray, and I think the reason for that was, again, it's reliving what I saw. And I've when I did see a gray, I was like, oh my gosh. I don't know if it was exactly a gray. It was very similar. I don't know why they're called gray though, because this being's skin was not gray. It was like eggshell, but not. That's the closest. So I have no idea why they're called grays. I assumed it was because of maybe their skin tone, but I have no idea. And I'm sorry, can you repeat the question from Bruce?
Just, was there any smell or odor?
Oh, smell. Okay, and then going back to the previous question of, were there any specific features that I recognize or I recall the most? I would say one was definitely size, because it was a little confusing. It was like, is this a kid? No, it's not a kid, because it doesn't look like a person, but it kind of looks like a person. I would say the eyes. The head was odd, but when you are entranced, it's the eyes that entrance you. You really actually don't focus on anything else. The eyes were incredibly, incredibly captivating. So I would say the eyes definitely were, and still are, one of the things I recall the most. That was the most obvious and the most different about this being. And no, I don't recall any smells. I just recall stillness and stuckness and calmness, but no smell and no sound. So just reading that again, like, took me back to that moment, because I'd forgotten about the calmness. I was like, oh yeah, it seemed like everything, that's what was so eerie about it, is because prior I could hear the chaos, and then all of a sudden I couldn't. And then it was like slow motion, but not really, because there was no movement. It took everything in my power, or it felt like it took everything in my power to disconnect that interlock with the eyes. I don't know how long that took. I don't know if it was one being or multiple beings. I know that my friend and I saw it sort of like over here, then we saw it over here, still within a short distance, but it was in two different places. So it was very, very, very interesting. And I've never experienced anything like it since.
So have you, this leads up to a question that was asked, have you had any encounters since?
No. And as far as I know, the folk who were with me on the playground haven't either. If they have, they haven't said anything, but I would imagine that they would. We were just kids enjoying our lunchtime in the middle of nowhere in a small country that most people outside of Africa don't even know about, let alone these kids, you know, in the bush just having their break time in September. My understanding, and thank you, Maureen, for reminding me of this, is that there were some sightings earlier on that week. I could be way off, but I feel like this happened on a Thursday or a Friday. It was toward the end of the week. And earlier that week, there had been some very unusual sightings that were actually reported on the news, like the local ZBC news, by pilots, you know, who were like, had called in and said, I don't know, whatever pilots talk about. I know we have one on the panel, Dan, you might know more, but you know what, you know, hey, is there, who has airspace or who's flying or whatever. And they actually played that on the news. It was very unusual because I don't know, they just didn't really report on stuff like that. And that was it was maybe earlier that week or the week before. So it is interesting that our little school was sort of within that arena of, and I think the place that happened was close to Ruwa. I can't remember exactly where, but I do know it's public record. But we didn't know. I mean, not paying attention to the news at 11. So it was interesting that did kind of occur for us very closely as well. And then the news, then the ZBC spoke, you know, kind of combined the stories later on.
Another question, this comes in from one of the attendees, Chuck. The repeated theme of doing harm to the environment has been the environment. That's a repeated theme. Do you want to talk some more about that?
Sure. I mean, again, I can't speak to it because I didn't get a message, or again, if I did, I don't recall it. But the other folk who did get messages about us taking care of the environment, I think it speaks to, again, the time that we were in. It was 1994. We were in a very small country, probably the size of the state of Montana, for those of you who just need like perspective. Population is about 11 million, if that. Yeah, maybe 12, but very small country, landlocked. And so we where we lived, were very in tune with nature. A lot of the schools would take us on trips to different parts of the country to learn about those areas. Inyanga was actually one. We didn't go to Nyangani, but we went to like Jeff Cox. You'd learn about the habitat there, you'd learn about the animals there. We were very in tune with that. It was something that was actually just part of the curriculum. So it was a norm for us to appreciate the environment. There wasn't anything like recycling or anything, but we also didn't waste. We just didn't, you know, we didn't have things like, we was always very mindful about where water came from, you know, where electricity came from, you know, respecting animals. So I thought it was very interesting that folk were getting that about the environment. But you know, what is also interesting is that most of us who are at that school do not live in Zimbabwe anymore. We live in different parts of the world where environmental issues are much, much bigger. And none of us knew that at that time. Most of us didn't leave the country till, most of us, I didn't leave until I was turning 18. 7+ years later, I had no clue. I think that it also speaks volumes to the fact that as children, again, where we were and our mind, this was definitely my mindset at the time, and what we were taught was, again, you know, yes, our school was in the bush, but we loved it. We loved where we were. We could talk about, you know, the type of grass. We knew our space, and we knew the environment in which we lived in, and we appreciated it. And maybe that was sort of like a conversation, or this was the conversation around taking care of the environment, was something that we needed to remind folk about, in that it's not just us, and we need to be attuned to nature in order to survive, because she will always win, always. And she has. And so I think, you know, again, from an 11-year-old perspective, it's like, you know, of course you need to take care of the environment. What do you mean? But that is also what we were being taught in school, subliminally, right? Yes, it was also overt, but it wasn't like, hey, today we're going to learn about the environment. It was, again, we're going to go to this place and we're going to, different parts of the country. It's one of the things I appreciated most about our educational system is that, because you'll never get that here. And I will never get that again. And my children will never, ever be able to experience that. But I appreciated that, whether it was Nyanga, whether it was Chirundu, whether it was Limpopo, whether it was Chinoy Caves, you learn about the place in which you were in and have an appreciation for that, not knowing what that was going to do for us moving forward. And I think perhaps all of us took a little bit of that and of those experiences, because we all went on those trips and applied it in different ways of our lives, but perhaps not knowing at 11 what to do with that information, but still knowing that it was relevant for everybody. That experience may have been unique for us in that moment, in that space, but we all need air and water to live, and food. And what does that look like? So I don't have a definitive answer for you, but those are kind of like links that I would make with that.
Okay. Now the Ariel School was a private school, right? And
Yes.
there were a lot of different nationalities there.
Yes.
Okay. And Zimbabwe was?
Zimbabwe was a former British colony. It used to be called Rhodesia,
Okay.
after Cecil John Rhodes. And then it became Zimbabwe in 1980 after independence. We were still considered part of the Commonwealth, obviously under the British Empire at one point, but when we gained independence in 1980, the name changed, but it was former British colony. So British system, British educational system, a lot of Britishisms that I didn't even realize until I came here, actually. And people would ask me different things and I started to notice, oh, that's interesting. I mean, obviously a lot of our own, but this is what happens with colonies. Obviously, you adapt and absorb reluctantly or otherwise. I mean, I didn't know anything. I was born in 83. I didn't know any different. You absorb whatever the colonizing country wants you to. So, very different experience for me versus my parents, who grew up in segregated times. They grew up in an apartheid system, very different for my grandparents, who also grew up in that same system, but had less access to education. So I am very, very privileged, and I don't take that for granted. And I recognize that based on the time in which I was born and my parents' means to be able to send me to the school that I was able to go to. And also for the fact that at that time, Zimbabwe was no longer a colony and parents could send their children to any school that they could afford to, as should be the case. But that was not the case with my parents. So yes, that's why there are multiple nationalities, because we all pay the same school fees. And as long as you pass the entrance exam to get in, and you paid your school fees, that's just kind of how the system works. We have exams to get into all schools, high school, primary school. They love exams over there. It's a lot of tests. And it's not free. Not even public school is free.
Back to the beings. This came in from Dee Dee, and she wanted to know about the movements of the beings.
The movements?
The movements, how they walked, I guess.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I would say I saw it walk. I saw it appear in one place and then appear in another place, but I didn't see it transition to the different place. It was like I blinked and it was in another position. So I don't actually know. I think that's a great question. I personally don't recall seeing the being walking per se, or flying or floating. Some people have said that they saw that. I did not. It did seem, and I've corroborated this story with my friend who I was standing next to, like, it seemed as though we blinked and it was in a different position. Not far off from where it had been before, and I don't know if this is a different being. Is it the same being? And I think that's where I've never been certain about that, and I'm okay with it. I've never tried to make it be one thing or another. I've just gone with the fact that this is kind of what happened. I blinked and then there he was, or maybe it was another one. So I don't really have an answer for you in terms of movement, just knowing that if there were multiple beings, then we saw at least two. If it was one being, then it was able to appear and disappear literally within the blink of an eye.
Wow. Another question comes in from Josh. Who was the first person you told about the happening? And I guess what he means is maybe after
Family?
school.
Yeah. That's it. Oh my gosh. It's so this is why I think this happened. I'm pretty sure this happened on a Friday or a Thursday, because it would have made sense to have the staff meeting at the end of the week. But anyway, whatever. The Monday, there were press at the school, and I was called out of class by the headmaster, and I thought I was in trouble. And then I saw that there were other folk, and we were asked to speak to the press. I thought I could not. I was like, well, I still have some time to tell my parents. Short answer, my mom was the first person I told, but only after she heard that I was on TV in England. So the first folk on the scene, I think, were the BBC, actually, which is why I think this happened on a weekend, because I think they were there I know they were there, like they were some of the first press. And I did this interview, and one of my mom's sisters lived in England at the time. I guess saw me on the news, rang my mom up and said, I just saw Selma on the TV. What is going on? So then I thought, okay, well, guess there's no hiding this. So I did tell my mom, and I was very apprehensive to do so, because again, how do you explain to your parents what your experience was? And I was like, I like to be very clear about I try to be very clear about what I'm talking about, in the hopes that it lands more succinctly with someone. And I was like, how do I even explain this to my mom? Oh my gosh, I'm going to get into so much trouble. But she sat me down and she asked me what happened. And she said, when did it happen? And I told her, and she said, well, you are not a child who makes things up. You have a great imagination, but you're not a liar. So I believe you. And she told my dad, and that was that. They were very, very, I mean, I say that was that, in that they didn't hound me for more information. They also didn't really know that we were doing so many interviews. I don't think they would have been quite chuffed about that. It's not quite what their school fees were paying for, but anyway, I'm glad in a way. You know what? At the time, it was incredibly tedious. But look at what's out there now. Thank goodness. I guess in a way we did. To be fair, yes, it was tiring at the time, absolutely exhausting. But thank goodness we have those little films now. It's kind of fun. So yes, my mom was the first person I told. Although I guess, I mean, I didn't tell my brother and sister like, hey, I saw the alien, but when I did go find them on the playground, I just asked them if they were okay. And they were completely, they were none the wiser. They were like, what do you mean? They were panicked because I was panicked. And then they saw the chaos erupting on the side of the playground that I had been in. And then it became a problem. But to this day, neither of them say that they saw anything. They were just enjoying their break time. But I didn't actually say to them, hey, do you see the alien, or did you see that? I was just like, are you guys okay? I was like, did anything weird happen? And they were like, what are you talking about? I remember my sister being like, what? I interrupted her candy eating session. She was not thrilled at all. But my family are my biggest supporters. They have been amazing, amazing support through all of this. And they probably know far more about UFO information than I do. Way more. Not probably, they do, especially my youngest brother. He's an avid fan of conversations around UFOs. So yeah, I'm very grateful to my mom for being able to sit down and just listen. That was really, I mean, it changed how, it validated my experience, and also, reminded me, she was like, if you don't want to talk about this, you don't have to. So it made me feel safe. And I recognized that not everybody had that in having had these conversations with their parents, which ultimately all of us had to do because we were everywhere, news-wise,
The theme of religion is coming up in some of these questions. And
Sure.
I heard those questions too at the Phoenix UFO seminar. What was it a religious experience for you or for your classmates?
Again, I can't speak for anybody else. I wouldn't say that it was a religious experience for me. I was trying to make sense of it. I am Muslim. I was raised Muslim. That was also a little bit of the apprehension I had in telling my parents. I was like, I don't remember reading about any of this. But, you know, it's not like I had read the Quran through at 11, because I definitely didn't. I still haven't. But I don't know if I would say it was a religious experience. It was definitely nothing that I've ever experienced before. And if that is what a religious experience is, then okay. Because I definitely did feel like it was an out of body experience. I was there, but I wasn't there. I was there, but I wasn't in control. Didn't like that very much. I mean, I don't know anybody who doesn't like being in control, but I didn't like not being able to move, you know. And again, we always, as human beings, we try to rationalize everything in the moment, like, okay, make it make sense. And it wasn't making sense. And I'm still trying to make it make sense, but I don't know. I've never considered it a religious experience. I do know that it was a very special one for me personally, and that I don't think I'm a chosen anything, but I think that there's a reason for having had that experience. And as I continue to grow, literally with age, I am figuring out what that is for me. And and maybe by the time I get to the end of my life, I would have, and if not, that's okay too.
Okay. Question came in. Do you think maybe your other classmates might have influenced what you saw?
That's a great question.
Just
No,
the influence from your peers.
that is a very good question. If so, yes, to a point, but couldn't influence. They might have influenced my curiosity, might have piqued my curiosity. Hey, can you see that? But they didn't make me see what I saw. And there was no conversation when we were having these experiences, seeing what we were seeing in terms of what we were seeing. None of us actually spoke about what we were seeing in that moment. We all spoke about it afterward, separately in interviews. So do with that what you will.
Dan, I want to see if Kathleen, I believe she may have some questions. If she wants to come in and take over.
Thanks, Walt. Thank you, everybody.
That's pretty exciting. I do have a few questions. Let me look at it. Did you draw a picture at all?
I did draw a picture, and I think it's in a book. I saw it in 2013 when we were filming James Fox's film, which has just come out. I saw it in a book, and I had no idea that it was in a book. And I was just thumbing through the book. Someone was like, "Oh, have you read this book?" Please don't ask me what it was called. I have no idea. I'm the worst. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm like the worst experience because I'm like, I haven't read anything. I don't know. I can only tell you about my experience and my classmates' experiences. But in this book, it was pretty thick book. I was thumbing through, and I think Ariel School was a chapter in this book. So I think I went to it, looking at it, and my photo was in this book. Now, my name is not on the bottom of it, which is interesting because we all wrote our names on it, names and maybe the date, but pretty sure our names and maybe our grade. And so, yes, I did draw a picture. And when I saw it, it took me all the way back. And I said, "That's my picture." And I remember Randall saying, "Yeah, it is." And I said, "Wait, but it doesn't even," I was like, "There's no credit there for my photo." I was like, "How do you know it's mine?" And I think he might have the originals.
Yeah,
Someone has them. Oh, what? So it made me feel it made me feel really good. One, that I was like, oh my gosh, I remember. Of course, you wouldn't think God, how old was I in 2013? I think I was turning 30. Yes, or I just turned 30, and so I hadn't seen that picture since I was 11.
right?
but it came back to me just like that. So yes, I did draw a picture, and it's in a book somewhere amongst other amazing photos from my former classmates who also drew what they saw. And I think there's some really, really fascinating photos.
Yeah, well, part of the reason, that's basically my question, was putting together this session. He'd taken a lot of those photos and manipulated them a little bit. And I thinking, which one of these is Selma's? Did she do this? And so that was one of my questions there.
Oh, yes, it's probably amongst whatever collection you have, but I'll know it when I see it.
Okay. Let's see, this is from Eric. Have you had any bad dreams or any other incidents where something like that has frightened you enough to bring you into some sort of nightmare scenario, or do you think that could be what it was?
No, I have never had any bad dreams about that, Eric. I've actually never even dreamt about it, which is interesting because, especially after having this conversation, I'll be thinking about it for a while, but I've never had a dream about the incident ever. I would say and no, I don't think it was a bad dream. I know it wasn't a bad dream because there were a lot of us in it. So unless we're all traveling, doing, what is it called? Astro travel or whatever, I'm just like, what is going on? If it were just me, that might be, sure. But there were a lot of other children. And as I've learned now, some adults who also saw some things on the playground. So I don't believe it wasn't a bad dream for me. I can't speak for everybody else. I don't believe that the experience was necessarily the same for everyone. Some people I know have really grappled with the incident, and some people have had a lot of PTSD as a result of it. I personally have not. The only time that I actually felt a little bit, not even a little bit, I was very afraid, I won't lie, was the following year. The following year I was 12 and I was running cross country and I was the best. And I was like, I'm definitely not going to lose. But the cross country course passed through these same bushes that we had seen these beings, or the being, also passed through where the craft was. And they did go back and do some research. I mean, you all are the experts that have this information that can corroborate that there was definitely some radioactive something or the other that had occurred, like anthills were dead in the area. I mean, this is a school in the bush. Like, what in the world? It just wasn't making sense. So that was also validation for us. Like, okay, we're not lying. That the scientists came out and said, hey, for those of you who are science oriented, here's what we found. Here's the things that don't make sense. Maybe there's something to this. Anyway, I was just to say, we had to run through there, and I was terrified. I was actually terrified that they were going to come back and get me. That was the only time. I broke the record. I don't know if anybody has broken the record since. I'll have to ask Ms. Bates, but I ran for my life because there was no option not to. So they still made the cross-country course how they made the cross-country course, and oh well, figure it out. Hope you don't, have an encounter of, what is it, the fourth kind when you're abducted. Good luck. Yep, I ran for my literal life. That was, I think, the most afraid. I probably was even more fearful then than I was during the experience, simply because obviously I had time to process. I was now a little bit more familiar with maybe what I had experienced. And so, yes, now I was afraid. And that was a little nightmarish for me. But I made that nightmare short because I ran.
And it made you a hero as far as winning that race, right?
Sure did. My team were thrilled. Our house won. Oh, yeah. My mom was like, what? I mean, it felt like I didn't exhale. Obviously, I did because I was running. But I don't think I actually felt comfortable until I came out of the bush and ran in the onto the field. That was like when I saw people, I was happy because there was the section, and that was the first section we had to run in, was going through that area where all of that activity had happened. And there were no, you'd be like, oh, there's an adult checkpoint. Nope, there weren't any for some time. Yeah, I ran. That I think is the most probably that was the most nightmarish for me. But nothing since then. And guess what? I never ran that cross country course again because I didn't have to.
Great.
But I do think it was interesting how they made it that way. I was like, this doesn't seem very fair, but your children, you do what you're told. And I was a track runner and I was not about to lose. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take that. I'm going to work with it. This is what we're going to do. Did I like that question? It's a good question.
Good. So let's see. And what about your brother? Is it just that his sister has been that famous on
That's a great question. Like he's the youngest. He was just born. He was 1 year old when this happened. And we moved to the state. When we moved to the States, he was 7. He was 8. He had just turned 8. And yes, because I turned 18 that year. And so, 10-year gap between us. It wasn't probably until he was maybe 11 or 12 that he, I think, maybe found a YouTube clip. I don't know what he found. Or he heard a conversation about, it's not conversation that we have around the dinner table of like, hey, that time when. I think it came up in passing and he was like, wait, what? How come you didn't tell me? And I was like, how do you begin to have that conversation? I didn't even tell people. So I think since then, it just really piqued his curiosity. I think he's also just a naturally very curious person. He knows he's also interested in military stuff and he likes history. But yes, his knowledge about all things UFO it's definitely vast. He knows all the people that he should know, and he's watched all the things and read all the books. And I definitely, I'm sure in some ways he wishes he had that experience because he's like, I feel like I just care about this more. I don't think it's not that I don't care about it. I want to be mindful also of my own sort of like my own boundaries, right? I had this experience, and so I said no to speaking engagements like this for the longest time. I just didn't want that because I needed a process on my own. And having the capacity to be able to do that has been really helpful for me, just in terms, again, of like figuring out, understanding my experience and being able to share that with folk, because there are a lot of people who have and continue to keep their experiences sort of under wraps for their own reasons. And I thought, okay, well, Selma, when you figure out your experience and you figure out how to process what you need to process, then just by talking about it might help someone else, especially for the fact that, it doesn't go unrecognized to me that I'm a Black African woman on this platform where you don't see a lot of folk of color having these conversations. We know aliens aren't prejudiced, so what is that, But it's something that I'm like, okay, the more people talk about it, hopefully that will encourage other people to share their experiences if they want, or at the very least, let them know that they're not crazy.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Does your brother go with you when you do speaking engagements at all?
No, but he'd love to. He asks now. He's like, I'm coming with you. I'm just like, what? Oh, sure. My sister was with me when I filmed. And this is, again, obviously not the brother that was on the playground. The brother that was on the playground is, married and has 4 boys. And also, of course, has been very supportive. But I think he's less into it as my youngest brother. My sister came with me when we filmed Jane Fox's film in 2013, and she was, and I wasn't sure how interested she would be, but she was fascinated, far more than I was. I was jet lagged. I was in law school at the time. I was like, can we go? I just want to go to the hotel. And she looked at me and she said, no, we have no. She was like, you go sleep. I'm listening. This is fascinating. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. So really, I'm really, really grateful for that. Because what's great about that is that folk can do their own research. And, yes, every once in a while, they might ask, hey, when is this film coming out? Or, hey, can I ask you a question about XYZ? And I'm more than happy to dive into that for them. But I love that they also have the capacity to do their own sort of research and that they're also like my biggest fans. It's really nice.
Yeah. So that is a couple of the questions of when the Ariel School Phenomena movie might be coming out, because we know that they've been working on that for a while. And
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been in touch with Randall for, we keep missing each other. I know it was I thought it was supposed to come out this year because I think it's the anniversary. Oh my gosh, I think it is. How many, 25 years or whatever? I don't know when it's coming out, unfortunately, but I know that it should be soon. And we're all excited about it, although I probably won't see it. I know, I'm not in, I would rather watch someone else. I'm not interested in hearing or seeing what I say. I don't watch any of my interviews. I'm just no, no. It's not for me.
You're very humble. That's wonderful.
I don't need to, rehash anything, but I am fascinated and grateful that folk are have taken an interest or continue to take an interest, even if there was some time, between our actual experience and putting this information out there on a platform that, is more accessible to the world. I'm very, very grateful for that, because again, our story is not unique.
Right.
And it's not the end all. We will continue to have these conversations for time. And maybe now that the government have come out and said that, oh yeah, by the way, this is real. What you always knew, yeah, it's real. All those folk were, not crazy. They saw what they saw and they were right. Perhaps now we can have a little bit more of an open dialogue about all of this. And not that we need to come to a conclusion, but that we can at least start off on a platform where it's not accusatory, or it comes from a place or that it comes from a place of doubt. So I think it's a good starting point. And if anything that I've experienced has contributed to that, even in a small way, then I'm grateful for that.
Well, that's wonderful. I know we were pretty excited to get you on our Zoom meetings, just for that very reason, that it goes out to everybody. And we know that it goes across all walks of life, all colors of people, it just is amazing. So we're very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's my honor. Honestly, it truly, truly is. So thank you for allowing me to come on here and process.
Yeah, you bet.
Every time I talk about it, I remember, or I recall something different, or something sits with me where I'm like, you know what? Oh yeah, that makes sense. So it's a very, in a sense, it's therapeutic for me. I didn't think it never used to be, when you're just bombarded and jammed with questions, obviously. And I was a child, so there's that. But, having to not only focus on that, because there's also this thing called life. And so it goes, and then having to, leave your homeland and move to a completely different place. There was no time to be thinking about any of that. There are other things at the forefront. Sure, it was always there, but didn't have time to sit and focus on that. And it came up again as and how it was supposed to. So maybe in that sense, it is divine timing. Back to the religious question. I don't know.
Yeah.
Kathleen, let's go on to Maureen. I know she has some questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathleen.
When you mentioned running through that where the craft had landed and where the being had emerged, and it just didn't sound to me like when there was all that discussion about the event when it was happening and the beings coming over, you're approaching each other, you're getting telepathic messages. I didn't see any reason for you to be afraid. And I was wondering what was
Yeah.
could it even have been the demeanor or the excitement of the teachers, the schoolmaster, having John Mack come, having the BBC film team, what it was about this made you so frightened rather than curious when you went through that area?
I think you are right, Maureen. I think it was a combination of those things. And I think it's a great question because, how is it that I was more afraid afterward than I was during, right? And I actually, that's one of the things that I just verbalized today and recognized, like, oh yeah, actually, when I think about it, I was not happy to be running through that cross country course that way. And I think it was because now we had a name to what we'd seen. I didn't have a name to it when I was looking at it. I didn't know, but now I had a name. And so I don't know anything about this. I don't know, I don't have Google that I can ask and do research on, which might have frightened me even more. Thank God we did not have Google, because that would have terrified me. It's the worst thing to do, self-diagnose. No. So what I think I was the most afraid of was that I didn't know if they were going to come back. And this time I was running. So I also, again, I'm super competitive. So I'm not going to run just to I knew I was going to be ahead of the pack. So I knew I was going to be alone. And I think that was also a part of the reason why my fear set in, where I didn't have curiosity. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I didn't want to be by myself and have an experience, I think is really what it was ultimately. Now that I had a name to it, I didn't want to go through that alone, because I hadn't gone through it alone the first time. But I like that question because I've never thought about it.
Interesting in that it really I find your answer interesting in that it really underscores the long-term traumatic effect that even a mild situation. I mean, it's not like you have entities that appear in your bedroom and you're taken up to some craft and you find yourself on a table. It was a pretty innocuous kind of event, and yet what it's done to you and probably to experience it. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if it's not including the teachers and the other people involved as well. But somehow what appeared to be rather a mild encounter has had a lifetime effect on you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like I said, I continue to try to make sense of what those effects are, and those effects manifest in multiple ways. And to be honest, those effects started that very next year when I had to go through that. I would have been fine running anywhere else. Totally fine. It almost felt as though we were, what does my dad call it? Tempting fate. Are we disrespecting the sacred land? I did not like it. I didn't think it was wise. Nothing happened to anybody, but I remember how I felt in that moment. And again, I know I broke the record, and there's a reason for that, is because I flew through there. I wasn't curious about taking time to feel the breeze or, imagine what it would have been like to have been that close to the craft or no, I was like, get me out. I do not want to be here. I don't like this. I felt more uncomfortable running that cross-country course the next year than I did having had the experience. And you're right. A part of it is influence in terms of now putting a name to to this experience. If we didn't have a name, it would have been like, I remember that time when, okay, cool. Well, but now there's a name to it, and I don't know how to make sense of it. And I'm 12, my 12-year-old brain is like, well, what if something, what if it comes back to get me by myself? This time I'm not with my friend, because I knew I was going to be leaving people behind. I knew that. I was a fast runner. That was a non-starter. But I was like, okay, so do I run with the pack or do I just get this out the way? I went with option B. Get it out the way. I'm like a get it done kind of person. So I just ran. I'm curious about the time though. I need to ask Ms. Bates what my record was.
I'm not sure whether this is a question or comment, but when I was doing a little research last night on UFO schoolyard encounters, and Preston Dennett's book on schoolyard encounters, and he has a book that includes what he considers to be the 100 best documented cases. And first of all, this was something that I didn't know anything about. And you have to wonder clearly if there's that many sightings that or incidents that take place in which dozens and sometimes hundreds of people witnesses, this seems to be a whole area of ufology that's been kicked under the rug and kind of hidden. And it makes me wonder if it's because it's dealing with, is there something about children that, that various ETs find interesting, or compelling or whatever, but clearly this is something that happens a lot and nobody's talking about it.
I do wonder if, children are untapped, especially, and I don't know when this book was written, right? But if we're thinking
Recent.
it was recent and the occurrences were recent?
No, they were all pretty much from yours back.
Okay. So I think there's something to be said about that, because if we're thinking about the impact of technology, that was also one of my classmates got a message about technology, and that I think it was something along the lines of not that it can be dangerous or something. I don't even know how, like, again, we didn't have a computer at home. We definitely didn't have computers at school. We hand wrote everything back in the day when you actually had to have good handwriting. I think there's something to be said about the fact that children have these experiences because they are untapped, as in they haven't been, or at least back then, we hadn't really been exposed to very much in terms of this. So that, that makes us, I think, maybe if you're trying to get information across, whatever that information is, or if I'm picking, okay, if I'm coming to Earth, who do I want to visit? I'm going to pick children, or I'm going to pick the elderly. They're the most honest group of people that you'll ever find, I think, usually, right? Because they're untapped. I mean, elderly folk have lived their life and they don't have time to BS around anything. So they just keep it real. And kids, I just think, are so happy and accepting for them, of all things, and friendly. And again, when I think about who I was as an 11-year-old in 1994 versus who my brother was as an 11-year-old, the youngest, as an 11-year-old here in America, totally different worlds. His access to information was vastly different. One, because of the growth of technology, right? And two, because we lived here. So I think, I don't know where those schools are. I think it's interesting that they are schools. Do you know if they were primary schools or high schools?
It varies from primary to colleges, and it's
Interesting.
global. And
It's global.
this is the first, I think, Daniel Dennett, because he deals, his specialized area in ufology is basically close encounters.
Okay.
And this is the first time I've seen documentation of all of these incidents. But what I don't see is any kind of analysis as to were there similarities? Did see the same kinds of things? Did people react the same? There seems to be, I couldn't find anything that correlates any of these 100 cases. It's just you get, like Ariel School, you get them each individually. Nothing that brings them together is a possible common phenomenon.
Maureen, I think you've just given someone a new project, is pulling all of that
out there.
It is a fantastic question, and it's a great conversation to have of, yes, why children? And have there been more documented sightings of children having had these experiences than adults? And if so, why? And of the children who have had these experiences, what are the correlations between said experiences? I think it's fascinating.
One of the factors that I came up with that I found was rather disturbing was and last night I came onto a documentary that went through, again, like 10 different school sightings. And one of the things that kept coming up was that when children like you guys at Ariel School would report something happening, it was dismissed. You're just making it up. You're lying. The number of times when children reporting what their experiences was dismissed for 101 different reasons. And you just have to kind of wonder, what happened to society that they can't believe that their children can't be trusted to tell the truth? And it really disturbed me that this is something that seemed to be prevailing. Children are not believed.
I wonder, though, if that's necessarily a new phenomenon. I mean, especially when it's something that can't be explained. And I think children are dismissed. Well, in this example, I will use because this happened with some of our teachers where, one, it took them a long time to come out and be on the playground with us because they thought we were overreacting or making it up or whatever. It didn't make sense, which is a rational human reaction. But I also think that there's something to be said about the inability of adults sometimes to see a child's point of view and still recognize that that child's experience is valid, right? When it doesn't make sense to the adult, how do they, and this is of course by no means an excuse for anybody's behavior for not believing a child anytime a child tells you something. But I think, if I'm trying to, especially when the conversation hadn't been had, right? This is 94. There's not a lot of UFO conversations, if any. The most was probably ET, maybe the Jetsons. That's it, the end. Few and far between. What do you mean we saw an alien? And what do you mean by an alien? Like, what does that mean? Does that just mean an object or a person foreign to this country? Like, what are you talking about? I think that we can all do better as adults and I think, again, having the New York Times article that blew up where the government came clean about the fact that beings exist, and yes, this has been going on for time and UFOs are real. We now can start from a different platform, but that doesn't negate all the thousands of children who have been disbelieved since, and that's a problem. It's almost like, okay, sure, now you want to believe me? Well, it's human error. It's human error and it's human nature. I don't know why folk don't believe children. I know that as a child who was disbelieved by some of her teachers, I was believed by, for me, I'm lucky because my parents believed me. That's all I cared about. But not everybody got that. And so my world wasn't altered, and in that way, my life wasn't shattered in that, my parents didn't believe me. But there are a lot of kids out there whose parents didn't, even some of the folk I went to school with, and their lives have been very, very different. And a part of it may have been religion. A part of it may have been a combination of religion and just it not making sense or it seeming completely irrational. And I think that that's why a lot of us just felt very comfortable in Dr. Mack's presence, is because he didn't make us feel irrational. He didn't say, "Are you sure?" We just had a conversation, and he addressed us by name. Those are things that I do remember. Again, I can't recall what we spoke about, and I don't know if he came to the school multiple times. He probably did. I mean, he came all the way from Massachusetts to Zimbabwe. That's not a short distance. He probably came to the school over the course of a week or something, but he was able to talk to us in a way that was validating. We were having a conversation. I don't want to say he treated us like adults, but you know what he didn't treat us like? Like we didn't know what we were talking about. That's the big difference. Yeah. So I think we can take lessons from other people's experiences that way and have a conversation around it. I also think kids don't, yes, kids are imaginative, but imagining something like that is, okay, sure. But let's ask ourselves why? Why that particular thing? Why that particular being? Why that particular time? I think that when we get down to the crux of it, we can find out that, ultimately, we're just looking for ways to rationalize our own fear.
Well, it does make you wonder if the people who are the debunkers, not even skeptics, because skeptics at least have an open mind, the right evidence. But yet it makes you wonder how many people who simply can't accept it were those who were most harshly put down as children. That, oh, you just imagined it. It was a nightmare. It didn't happen. Why are you lying? And it could very be one of those things that they take into adulthood and they've just been trained. Their curiosity has been stomped out.
And well, not only their curiosity, their trust in adults, right? Because now, let's say this incident happened with the aliens. What if a sexual assault happened and my mother didn't believe my former thing that I told her, and she's like, "You're making it up." Do you think I'm more likely to tell her or not tell her? I'm not likely to tell her. And I think that, I'm not saying that that's what happened. I'm saying that it leads to other things, any other thing, you know, or if you have, maybe you're experiencing mental health issues, you have maybe develop that may or may not have to do with the incident. Although I think some of it might be related, not necessarily the incident, but the conversations afterward with said adults. You know, if we're thinking, who do I reach out to? If for this one, you know, this informs my trust in adults moving forward. And sorry, go ahead.
Maureen, could I jump in with a couple of questions?
Absolutely. Go. I've been hogging the stage here.
Hi, Dan. Thank you, Maureen. We can talk forever.
Yeah, we are going to have to soon.
Anytime.
You're only across the pond.
That's right. That's right. We're so close.
I was going to ask you a couple of quick questions about the event.
Sure.
And you when you described your situation, you were initially attracted to it by glint from off in the bush. Did you, or do you know if any of your classmates saw the craft actually land into the bush?
Some people said they did. I did not. I recall, because again, I didn't even know what I was looking at. It was just very, very bright and silver-like in color, and it made no sense that it shouldn't be the rock, which is why my friend and I thought it was a part of the granite rock. But it was way too, you know, granite rocks have, like, again, they have specks. It's just they don't shine like that. But I saw it already on the copy, and I did not see it land, nor did I see it take off. But some people claim they did.
That's going to be my other question.
Yeah, no. And some people, because I think for me, I was able to, when I let go of my friend's hand, I did not see the being again. I did not see the craft again. And that very shortly afterward, my friends who had, definitely the friend I was standing next to, had already moved away from where we were standing, sort of in like shock and awe and disbelief and a lot of confusion. And some of the other kids who also received messages had moved away from that boundary of the playground, because now we were like, what just happened? Once I disconnected, I did not see the being anymore, and I did not see the craft anymore.
Well,
and I don't know if that's attributed to the fact that I let go of my friend's hand, or if I was in a different part of the playground. But again, I don't know.
That was going to be one of my other questions, is for your specific incident, how did it end for you? And it sounds like you're saying you let go of your friend's hand and then you just stopped seeing what was in front of you anymore.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure my brother and sister were okay. You know, I wasn't sure of what I was seeing or what I was experiencing. I knew that it was confusing. It wasn't scary. It was just unusual in that we didn't know how to, I was trying to make it make sense. Again, trying to rationalize it. I didn't have a rational response. I didn't have a rational reason for why I was seeing what I was seeing. I didn't even have the vocabulary to explain what I was seeing even to myself. So I think that a part of me being able to break free of my friend's hand, which and worse, break free from the being's eyes, which was incredibly difficult. That sort of just disconnected me from everything else. Like that was it.
With respect to the eyes, I had a question for you.
Sure.
If I was to be standing, arm's length away from you, I could look at your eyes and I could say, okay, I see, the white of your eye, and then I see the iris, and I see a pupil and things like that. Could you see any detail like that in the eyes of the thing?
The eyes were just big and black, very, very, very black. I don't recall seeing an iris or pupil. I just recall seeing a very big black very, very captivating eyes.
And you're certain they were actually the physical features of the creature?
Yes.
Not
Yes,
a
they were on the
goggle or
face. Yes, they were in.
not Foster Grant sunglasses or something like that.
No, I don't think they sold Fosters in Zimbabwe. Maybe Ray-Bans. No, definitely not. Definitely not, Dan. And it again is attributed by the fact that none of us spoke about what we saw on the playground that day. Because
Well, you're really good. You're coming up with the answers to all my questions
Oh, was
before
that
you even
you?
ask them. I was going to ask, was there two groups of kids who saw the thing and had the experience, and were there other groups of kids who had been on the same playground and didn't have any sort of experience seeing the thing?
Yes, I mean, my brother and sister are just two examples of that, right? They were on a different side of the playground and they didn't see anything.
So was it mainly a function of those who were in that area of the playground saw it and those in other areas didn't?
You know, I think that's a great question. I don't know if enough research has been done because, again, those kids on the area of the playground where my brother and sister were the younger kids. And those kids who were playing there were not interviewed. So we can't say for sure that those kids didn't see anything because they were never interviewed. There was no chaos that was occurring on that section of the playground. But I also don't believe that these UFOs want to create chaos. I think that they are way smarter than we are and know exactly what they're doing. And I think that if your plan is to either connect with folk or get a message or whatever, obviously creating a chaotic situation is not going to be the best format to get said message across or get whatever connection you need. I think that the chaos kind of came afterward with a lot of panic of like, what do you see? I don't see it. What are you seeing? And that's, again, human behavior. We just naturally gravitate to sort of this chaotic behavior when somebody is also behaving that way. And so where my brother and sister were, again, it's all an open playground. It was essentially separate from where the occurrence that I experienced happened. But that's not to say that something didn't happen over there. But they were playing like nothing had happened. So maybe, maybe.
In the aftermath of the event, later that day, the next day, over the weekend, the next week when you came back to school, did the group that had experiences, that did see something, their interaction with the other group that didn't see anything, do you have any comments to make on that kind of interaction? Were you looked on as liars or fantasy maker-uppers or anything, or?
Well, we were the elder kids, so they
okay.
definitely didn't call us liars, at least not to our faces, because we were the cool kids. I think the doubt came more from adults, going back to Maureen's original statement about children not being believed. I don't recall any younger kid, obviously, calling an older kid a liar. I mean, that's just not what you do. That's not good for them. You want to have your lunch in peace for the next few years. But I do think that the doubt came more from adults than it did other children. I think other children, definitely, at least even within whether it was friends from other schools or my cousins that went to other schools who were not even close to Ruwa were more curious. A lot of that was more out of curiosity rather than try to debunk or rationalize what we had seen.
It was a question that kind of came in, and it's kind of a question I had too.
Okay.
From your own point of view, I know you were just a 13 or 12-year-old girl there, but the question seems to be is a lot of people came in and talked with you. Reporters and psychologists and things like that. But to your recollection, were there any officials who came in, the military, the police, the Zimbabwean UFO Investigation Bureau or anything like that? Was there an official? Look, you said that scientifically the site where it landed was analyzed. Was that analyzed by UFO enthusiasts? Or was that analyzed by scientists from the government or something like that? You know anything
That's
about
a
that?
great question. That's a fantastic question. I don't know. If they came onto the premises, it was not when we were around. And I will say I appreciate that, because that would have terrified us. Like, if you think about children's, it was already terrifying enough that we had all these cameras all the time to talk about the same thing over and over and over again. And so, you know, if all these other people are coming in with this very interesting equipment, it just wouldn't have made sense. I don't know. I would imagine that it needed to be, you know, if there was an analysis, sort of like an aftermath analysis that was done in the areas that we were pointing toward, that they would have had to have been experts. Who they were, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that information is out there. I know Randall Nickerson knows a lot more about that, because obviously John Mack would have known a lot more about that, and he worked very closely with John Mack. And I do recall asking him about it. He was like, yeah, people, I mean, we had heard that people had come to the school, we just didn't know who they were. So it would make sense then that if this obviously had to be analyzed scientifically, that they would have experts in the field doing that research, gathering the soil samples, gathering vegetation, doing whatever folk do to investigate areas of UFO sightings, and taking that information and putting it somewhere. Great question. Where is it? Not a clue. It might be hidden somewhere in the Zimbabwean government archives. Who knows? I mean, yeah, of all the things to hold on to, but obviously none of that would have happened without the government's permission. So my guess is, and at that time we were under Mugabe. It wasn't quite a dictator at that point. I think he was still working up towards that. But I would imagine that there's some things in the vault in the government that are very interesting for them to share.
And that we'll never
But
see.
we know how governments like to keep some things at bay for time.
Yeah.
Well,
Here, I have
Selma?
one last question I'd like to ask.
go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Dan.
So I watched a documentary last night on Ariel School. I mean, it was just a short one, but they talked about how the beings floated out of these objects. That there weren't doors and windows. There wasn't a ladder or anything where somebody walked out of it, but they seemed to emanate from within it. Is that how you remember it?
How I remember it is the craft was about 2 football fields away, right? And then the being was an arm's length away in the blink of an eye. So I don't recall the transition between how it got from the craft to how it got in front of me. I know it was quick. And then the same thing when I was holding my friend's hand and us looking over here, and then us looking over here, blinking, and then looking, seeing it. It's almost like we knew where to look for the being or beings. But I personally did not see it either go back into the craft or see it come from the craft. Yeah. And that might have just been the time in which I was figuring out what was going on. It might have just not been, a part of my story to tell. But I do recall that the distance that it would have had to travel, obviously, to get that close to us was like that.
Well, and again, the author of the program I was watching last night must have talked to other students who had the memory of the being just sort of like emanating, the beings materializing out. I don't know that any of them remember them going back in, but basically just sort of like flowing out of the craft.
Wow. Yeah, and I think there's some there's some drawings where some of the children, illustrate that. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. It was not my experience, but I'm glad that there's some kids who were able to put that into illustration, because you know what? At least that's out there now. And you probably saw me on those videos. I don't watch any of them, but yes, apparently they are out there. And apparently I still look the same as I did when I was 11. So
I certainly want to thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I mean, really great. And I'd like to thank Walt and Kathleen and Maureen for sharing some questions there.
That was excellent. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you, Bruce.
Yes, next month we're going to have a friend of mine that I've known for several years, and we were Facebook friends before we got to meet in person. It's Earl Gray Anderson, and he's the Southern California Assistant State Director for MUFON. He's a chief investigator for Southern California. He's done almost 500 cases now. So he's going to come next month. Earl's a fascinating speaker. He's got a lot of good information, and I think he's got some cases that you're really going to hear about. He's been on Night Dreams Radio, Radio Wasteland, Somewhere in the Skies, and then recently, I think it was last year, he was on a Travel Channel special on storming Area 51. Earl comes by his UFO experience honestly. His mother was one of 2 personal secretaries for Howard Hughes, and so toward the end of her life, she started opening up about her experience in underground bases that she actually worked in. So next month, you'll hear from Earl about his experience and his relationship with his mom and some of the top cases in MUFON, Southern California.
Thanks, Bruce. We look forward to hearing that next month. If we were doing this in person, we'd be around after the meeting and people would walk over to us and share with us some of their situations. And if you have something you want to share with MUFON, if you have an actual UFO sighting you want to report, that's done very simply. Just go to MUFON.com, and right up there on the top of the screen, you'll see report a UFO. And if you put that into a report and submit it, one of our Washington State field investigators will get back in touch with you and do a detailed investigation into that experience. If you just like to talk with somebody personally, email address at the bottom of the page there, mufon.investigates@gmail.com, will put you directly in touch with Maureen, and Maureen will either take the case or hand it to one of Kathleen or myself or Sue Countess, one of our other ERT team members, and a person experienced in dealing with people who have had these direct contact type experiences will be in touch with you and help you with that. So remember that.
I would just like to thank everybody for attending. It's you give us a reason to put these on, and we learn from everybody we bring on. And it's certainly want to thank Selma for taking the time to talk to us, all of the MUFON team that worked so hard to put this together. And it's
you have a few minutes to join us in our after meeting if people have some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
I will absolutely take some time.
Let's all say goodbye. Say wave goodbye and say thank you very much. Thank you for everybody who attended the webinar. If you're not going to join us again, thank you very much for your contributions, your donations you've made that help fund us, because this is not a cheap thing to do. We really appreciate that.
Thank you all for
Bye,
having
everybody.
me.
See you next month.
Thank you.